Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement in order to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Katsaruba, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees and give a special thanks to Brandy Garish and the entire Anchor team for making today's event possible. Before we begin, I really want to encourage our audience to submit questions of their own in the Q&A section of this platform down below, and also be sure to respond to our poll questions as we go through in order to receive your CPE credit for attending today's event. So with all that said, I'd love to welcome our panelists to go ahead and come on camera and unmute yourselves, because we're going to begin with a round of introductions from each of you. If you could share with us who you are, what agency or organization you represent, and what your role is there. I think that'd be a great way to kick it off. AJ, let's have you begin first, please.
Great. My name is AJ Stein. I work in the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the Computer Security Division, and I work on a security data format project called OSCAL as the technical director.
Thank you. And Alisa, let's move to you next.
Hi, my name is Alisa Fiola. Alisa, just not Alyssa. My pronouns are she, they, and I support the Technology Transformation Services as a senior cybersecurity SME working within the innovation portfolio under where we have more of our solutions like login.gov, cloud.gov, and etc., and really just try to make sure that we are being cyber smart.
Thank you, Alisa. And Josh.
Hello, I'm Josh Bressers. I'm the Vice President of Security over here at Anchor. We're a next generation SCA company. And I do an enormous wide range of things, and I absolutely love it. I head up a group called SBOM Everywhere at the OpenSSF. I help out with Anchor's open source Sift and Gripe, some of you may have heard of. I've got some podcasts, and I've been doing this supply chain thing long before it was called supply chain, and I absolutely love it. So thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. We're excited to have you here too. And there's going to be one more panelist joining us. So when they come in, we'll have an introduction from them as well. But in the meantime, we can go ahead and kind of get started on this topic. Overall, I want to begin by discussing what really is the overall resiliency of America's software supply chain today. And Alisa, I'll call on you first to kind of help us out with this question, along with what is a really important first step that you feel people can take to really improve upon the resiliency of their supply chain?
Yeah, my favorite first step, second, third, and continuous step is knowing what you have. It's one of those things that sounds wicked easy, but as soon as you deploy any system or software, it's so easy for the baseline to creep and practices to get not lazy, but more relaxed as you're going through. And what you started with might not be what you end up having today. So just keeping an eye and making sure you have the processes, procedures, and techniques available so that you're really keeping an eye on what you have, because it's impossible to really know if you're vulnerable to something if you don't know what you actually have. We in here in TTS, we have some web tools that enable folks in the US federal digital space to understand what they have. Some things like site scanning, so you can have, a holistic view of what sites exist under your top level domain. Some digital analytics, so you can see from the websites that are deployed what actually the analytics around that. So just I could say more, but I'm just going to keep it at know what you got.
Thank you, Lisa. And I know we have, I think Sherry just joined. We'll get to Sherry in just a minute, but to continue this part of the discussion, AJ, do you have anything that you'd like to add to what Elisa just shared with us?
Sure. I think what Elisa said is definitely the primary thing, but I mean, that's why we're all here, right? There are data formats, there are processes, there are entire mechanisms that are being built on top of mechanisms. Supply chain used to be like, for Josh, as he just pointed out, there are people that have been in this so long, the name has changed incrementally, but we're still very focused on counting the things we have and knowing what those things are to know how to count them. Back to the original question, and why what Elisa says is very centric, like is very primitive, the very first thing, but that still takes a lot of effort. I'm kind of the jaded cynic. I don't know if that will help in this or hurt in this webinar. The my belief, if we're going to talk resiliency, is I don't really know if there is one supply chain, especially an American one versus others. I'm sure we could like dive into that for a very long time, but resiliency would to me would imply that there are different options and that you can combine them in a certain way and get a certain number of inputs, and you could get not maybe the exact same output in terms of a software solution or a product. The reality is, regardless of what kind of software you use from who, and there are details to that, and that's like a lot of the nuance of supply chain, it's very hard to take apples and different kinds of fruit and make like a fruit juice of some sort. I know in the SBOM community they have like other metaphors that are ironic, but this is something that's, despite software being almost infinitely configurable, is actually something very hard. And even in the open source world where things are quote unquote free, the ability to be resilient for America as like a foundational place or just where a lot of people happen to work is actually incredibly difficult. So I'd argue we're far away from resiliency. Is it better than it was N years ago, like last year, 5, 10, 15? Sure. But that's like a giant curve up a fun math hill to be cute about it.
Yeah, thank you for adding to that. Sherry, I'll get to you in just one moment, but Josh, do you have anything to add?
I do. I'm gonna disagree with AJ a little bit, because the thing I like to say whenever this question comes up is we have work to do and we have problems and we have large problems. But at the end of the day, society is still functioning. We pay our bills, we stream our Netflix, we have webinars together when we're scattered all over the world. And so I do think we have supply chain challenges, but I also think that like we're doing okay for the moment. But I like what AJ said when he talked about the kind of graph up into the right. I think the supply chain challenges are probably growing faster than our current solutions to those challenges, which is always the problem.
Thank you. Sherry, before we jump into the conversation, can you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yes, absolutely. And sorry for being late. Sherry Thomas. I'm the Cyber Technology Officer at Marine Corps Cyberspace Command, which is an operational command. And for this conversation, what I would say is agility and back to that curve analogy, exponentially growing, right? So we got to be keeping up with it. And in terms of resiliency that AJ talked about, multiple different paths and different mechanisms to get to, you know, whatever the second and third order layers of wherever we need to get to at the lowest point. So something that we stress on here at Cyber Command is to avoid, to the maximum extent possible, single points of failure. And that's, I think, where we're trying to hit on in the totality over here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Elisa, I saw your hand up earlier. Anything to add?
Yeah, I forget exactly what I was going to say. I felt like it was going to be a disagreement to Josh's disagreement to AJ. But Sherry really like nailed it on the head. It's the agility. And I think like we even demonstrated on this, like this panelist before coming on this call, we did a demonstrable resilient activity by like, oh, that link didn't work. Like, let's get us that new link. But what if Zoom wasn't working, right? Like, what's our contingency planning ahead of things? And for me, it's the mindset of, are we in the mindset where we have to be resilient and to be aware and cognizant of like, okay, maybe it won't work the first time, expect something else soon after. And that's kind of, I think, the agility Sherry had mentioned.
Yes, I really love those points. Thank you. Anyone else before I dive into this audience question that just came through? Okay, well then I'm going to ask you to direct your attention towards the audience question. Mark wants to know, what are some of the best ways for federal and private sectors that have better information sharing around supply chain risks and vulnerabilities? Maybe just in terms of communication and working with one another. Any thoughts on that question? Elisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll throw in, there is nothing I have seen that works better than your trusted group of people and confidence, and having the ability to get out there, be involved in the community, say, I work here and I might need to know information that is pertaining to this, and I have this information to give pertaining to that. And let's find common communities, like exactly what we're doing here. There's within TTS, we have the communities of practice, and we have other clients, client consulting type of folks that go out with the COEs and 18Fs, and just really to go out there and be available and spread the great information together.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, AJ.
Yeah, a lot of people work in government. That sounds kind of silly, right? There are people on this call that are federal employees. I like to call myself a baby fed. I've only been a federal employee for about 2 years. Before that, I was a government contractor. My flippant and almost funny approach to answering this question is do it. If you see a need to be on the private side and engage the government in a private public partnership, I happen to work for one of the weird agencies, being NIST, which is a part of the Department of Commerce, that's under the umbrella of facilitating commerce, believe it or not. Even if some of us work on open source software, there are definitely avenues for you to find ways to partner with people in government, even on what might seem like very specific niche cybersecurity topics like this one. By approaching people, a lot of people put in different, not just in NIST, in different government agencies, are very public about, we want feedback from people, even if it's, do you like this idea, or putting sweat equity into the idea. NIST in and of itself is not always just a group that does standards development. They call them SDOs. We even engage with other ones that you're probably familiar with. There are a variety of things that not just NIST makes, but NIST engages reciprocally with other public entities and private entities. And I've never met a group of people in government that actually publicly demonstrate or talk about wanting to do it and then push people away, because that's kind of the whole reason for it to exist. And most importantly, that usually is finding something that's not unto one company very useful that's private. There are lots of things that we want as a larger industry that are not financially viable in a very explicit, obvious way. But when you start glomming people together from different backgrounds to meet this higher level, I guess, cultural or industry need, then it becomes valuable and the price makes sense, even if that's people putting in sweat equity or coming together with funding a solution. So to go back to the original answer, which is pretty funny, do it. Find it, Google it, reach out to people, probably some of the people that are on this list. I'm sure you'll find that they're doing work where they're asking for feedback, which is basically de facto a public-private partnership with the federal government.
Thank you, AJ.
I'll put my hand down now.
Okay, Josh, go ahead.
I just wanted to, to build on what AJ said, like NIST is a great example of the government seeking input from others. I mean, like there was just a draft, I think it was 800-240D I learned about yesterday that just came out. And it's a draft and it says like, we want your feedback. And one of the authors is a private citizen who works for a company. That's phenomenal, right? I love that. If you look at all of the work happening in the SBOM world that CISA is doing, which was previously at NTIA, it is mostly, private citizens working for companies that are doing the work, where you have CISA and the government wrangling the effort. But it is, we live in a time of, I think, unprecedented cooperation between the private sector and the government, which is amazing. Because I remember when I was starting my career, the government was often kind of the butt of a lot of our jokes in the commercial space. And now I see the government is truly leading the way and helping, drive change and innovation, which is exactly what we need, I think.
Thank you. And AJ, I want to bounce back to you real quick. Sorry, Sherry. I see Sherry's hand
Go
was
ahead,
up.
Sherry. Yeah.
And then I'll ask you, AJ.
Yeah, so in that context that both AJ and John has mentioned, right? Authorities, policies, regulations, we're trying to trim all of it down. Multiple different organizations within the entirety of the government. From the DoD perspective, there is the Undersecretary R&E, which is looking at things out in the commercial space, how to integrate it tighter and better. It doesn't matter if it's a small, medium, large, how to tie it all together. There's the Office of Strategic Capital that was formed. There's Raider Funds, which is looking at small pots and how to scale it. So multiple different avenues are out there that vendors, industry, academia partners all have to be engaged in the totality of everything, either from a commerce perspective, from a transportation. And then what I see from defense is things that we do have linkages to the other departments. And that's another added value that we're providing in terms of, between departments in the government and how it ties into the commercial world. So, for example, if it's an electric vehicle maker, hey, there's a tie-in to DOT, there's a tie-in to energy, and there's a tie-in to defense, to name, three at the least. So we got to look at it from a larger perspective. Over.
Certainly. Thank you so much. So AJ, the question I was going to ask was our audience question that came through around,
Yes.
does NIST have a protection profile that's used to verify SBOM software?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I'm going to just go directly to my confidence level, Brianne. I can't tell you the 100% confidence that I know the answer to this, but I'm going to guess and read between the lines of some things you are asking. Most of the time when people say a profile, they mean one for the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is at version 1.1. I know people are talking about the future of it. So if that's what you mean, off the top of my head, I do not know for 100% that there is a supply chain risk management profile for that thing. And that's usually what people are talking about. However, there is a document and supporting information around a set of security controls based on another document that NIST makes that is a little bit more comprehensive than the cybersecurity framework. And that is called Special Publication 800-161, which is for the cybersecurity supply chain risk management guidance. It's a mouthful. Others on the call are probably familiar with it, and they'll correct me if I got it wrong, which will be very embarrassing and a kind of ironic. So to summarize, there is a profile that's not specifically what I think you mean, but there is another. And if Kirsten, if you want, I can tell them in an answer typing out what I just said as one document, or who they can ask about what I think they're asking somewhere else, if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. You can do it in the chat if you'd like, or we can send it out in a note later. But I think that you answered it really well. Thank you. We're going to put up poll question number 1, and then I'm going to jump into my questions again. So poll question number 1 on the screen. What is your perception of the current level of cybersecurity preparedness in America's software supply chain? So for our audience at home, please take a moment to respond to that. In the meantime, Sherry, I want to start with you next on this question. So basically, up until now, we've seen the guidance, but what really needs to happen next in order for organizations to take action? And along with that, what are the potential consequences of going another year just talking about this?
Absolutely. Take action would be regularly and continually because every single day and hour that we don't, we're allowing, someone else to take action. So we gotta stop that. And the other side of it is hardening the existing systems. Everything that has been put out, and it was in the poll question as well, right? The majority said not secure or can be done better. So things are coming out in terms of public space, private space, almost daily, that there are vulnerabilities and system failures. We just got to prevent all of that. At the same time, technology is rapidly changing, so we got to be ahead of the curve in terms of artificial intelligence or machine learning or other systems that are able to see those second and third order things that happen and monitor, right? So we got to be ahead of everything in the totality. From our space, from the DoD space, we're looking at it from a joint and a coalition perspective. So we're trying to tighten everything in a system of systems realm. Over.
Just realized I was muted. Thank you, Sherry. Would any of our other panelists like to respond to that question as well? Or we have an audience question that came through. I'll go ahead and read the audience question.
Can I just raised my hand, sorry.
Yes,
Do you mind?
Josh.
So I have one other thought on this that I find this question intriguing because I've been following this space for a really long time. I've seen countless bills come and go, some pass, many don't. And I think we are finally at a point where we're going to see regulation pushing a lot of this forward. And I think we need regulation to push a lot of this forward, because one of the things I like to tell people is we have the security the market demands today. And I don't think anyone's going to say it's good enough. Like, we can do better for sure. And I think really when you think about the knobs that really affect the way we behave in any situation, you generally have, your customers demanding something, which we're not seeing, or you have regulation saying you have to do it a certain way. And so I'm extremely hopeful that we see some regulation with teeth that comes in the very near future that's really going to help kind of push us down this hill in a really good way.
Thanks, Josh. All right, so our audience question that I was going to bring up is, if organizations don't have a process for digesting and ingestion for SBOMs, where should they start? Is it more of a governance approach, being rules before tools, or some more thoughts around this topic from our audience?
If no one else wants to jump in, I'm happy to do this. This is part of my day job and something I care about greatly, working with the OpenSSF on SBOMs. So there is not a lot of good guidance in this space today of kind of what to do. This is one of the things that is being worked on at the OpenSSF. And I know CISA has some working groups that are working on similar efforts. There's probably no less than 3 or 4 groups right now trying to put some of this sort of guidance together. And this is one of the challenges in the space, is the SBOM universe is very new and it's moving very, very quickly. And so anytime you have this kind of, nexus point of all these people working on a brand new thing, it's really, really hard to write guidance, because I know I've experienced starting to write down some guidance and then taking a couple of weeks off and looking at it again and saying, oh crap, everything's different. Everything I just did has to be thrown away. And so that's one of the really hard things. And so the advice I like to give to organizations is you kind of have to take a step back and make your own decisions at this point, where every organization is a little different. The reason you're going to have an SBOM is going to be a little different. Some people want it for vulnerability scanning. Some want it for doing, asset inventory, essentially, of your software. Some want it because their customers are saying you have to give us an SBOM, and they really don't care at all about keeping it themselves. And so why you're doing it is kind of the question. If you're just doing SBOM for the sake of doing SBOM, that's probably a project that's going to fail internally because there's just not the demand. And so I think this is definitely kind of rules before tools, I would say, but then you obviously also, you need a tool to do this. And that's when you have to start asking questions and kind of doing some exploration.
Thank you, Josh. AJ, go ahead.
I'm not going to disagree with anything that Josh says. Josh makes some very practical, very approachable points to this. I would say if you're in an organization that is making software or building things with other people's software. That's kind of very vague because this is a very large audience on the internet. So I won't presume some particulars about you. You need to talk to those frontline people first because they're going to be the people making it or consuming this same thing from other people, and you need to know how to help them and give them the space, incentivize them to do it. And more importantly, to combine with what Josh just said, you got to make sure you know why you're doing it. If it's not clear why you're doing it for them or with them, and they're here to help you, there is going to be precious little chance that it's going to succeed, in my opinion, only because it's really most applicable to them. So this is something they're doing for you, with you, by you, to help you understand what they do. So you got to make sure you understand each other, have them help them do it with you, for you, and make sure you have a clear, very repetitive way of telling them what reason of the several Josh mentioned is the reason or reasons you're doing it. Because if not, it's going to get very confusing and you don't have to use the guidance at all because it will get lost in the weeds. That's just my take.
Thank you. Sherry, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so the basics is, can you see yourself, right? You got to be able to look in a mirror from a software lens anyway, and say, what have I been putting out, and how is it being used? And then the larger perspective with that is, as it continues to develop, what are those second and third order factors with it, right? Something I hit on earlier was artificial intelligence. As we continue moving forward in terms of technology space, what can the current iteration and the future iterations of software be able to do? If we're not able to pinpoint all of those, things that it enables, then those companies and the products that they're delivering are failing themselves. Over.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments here before I call for our next poll question? All right. Poll question number 2 up on the screen, please. What is the main challenge for security and development teams in terms of hardening America's software supply chain? So please respond to that. Elisa, I want to hear from you next. From your organization's perspective, what specific challenges do you see coming up over the horizon? And can you share for us what focus area is your organization preparing for going into 2024?
Yep, I can really only speak for my small piece of GSA and the technology transformation services, but definitely doing the human-centered approach to software development and integrating security design into that aspect of it. So making sure that we have platforms ready, like a cloud.gov. So software development teams, if they don't have a cloud environment at their own federal agency, like giving them that place that they can go and prototype and build out some applications in a really awesome containerized way. And then also where the office where FedRAMP is. And so there's always room for improvement for that. Like taking something like the OSCAL and enabling the software cloud service providers to submit their system security plans directly in OSCAL to the FedRAMP program is really kind of some ways that we're trying to work smarter, not harder. And the more that we solve these challenges that take up a lot of our bandwidth, and as other folks are saying, like, let's use autonomous systems so that it frees us up to do some like human intelligence activities that we all say we never have enough time to do security. Awesome. I am so excited about this future because it sounds like we're going to get more time on our hands and really be able to fortify and harden and think strategically about the landscape of our ecosystem with our system. So I think that's really kind of the direction we're going in.
Yeah, thank you. AJ or Josh, I saw you guys kind of agreeing along. You want to add anything to that?
No, a violent agreement, as we joke in our group of NIST.
Yes.
There are many levels to what you can do or how you do it. Sorry, there's also a little bit of lag on my part. Welcome to world travel. The I think the important part is there's the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach. So now in this, there's like different ways you can see it going. That like bottom up, which are people like me that run technical projects, applying it and trying to surface up a good example. And then the top down approach might not seem so obviously top down. That might be kind of reductive, but like we send a lot of information out to the world to tell people this is a way you could do it. But whichever direction you go, if it's the technical people implementing things and showing these best practices or trying to novelly build them, or people trying to build these specifications and then hopefully reach down into like the front lines of the technical people, dog fooding matters. I don't know if there's a better term for it. At a personal level, in our team, when we have time, we try to make time. I wish I could make better time. It's actually something where I was thinking about a technical investment strategy. I don't like the term technical debt. We do things that are of varying levels of interest, but what's really important is the basics, and giving feedback, not just in the SBOM community, actually reviewing your dependencies. And I don't mean that to say that there isn't a certain amount of automation, but we get n numbers of dependencies that are coming in. When we have to review updates for security or feature enhancement, um, our group has a group of guidelines where I say, like, you have to look at it and tell me what you think. And there's definitely incentive and reward to get rid of that dependency if possible, move it down, but also don't just approve it and update it just for the sake of updating it because you don't want to see the notification. Understand what the changes are so you can try to understand by looking at the differences what you're getting. And if that's not working in a manual process or an automated process, um, the people that make things like SBOM or things that are adjacent, unfortunately, one of my colleagues mentioned OzCal. Yeah, I know something about that. I'm not going to here to pitch it, but we need people to tell us how they can or can't make it work, for their needs. And I can get into details about more things I try or I know people in our community are trying. But yeah, you have to get there, and a lot of the things that could be more advanced aren't interesting until you do the fundamentals. Um,
Yeah.
I should leave some time for other people to talk.
Thank you, AJ. Josh, did you want to add anything?
I mean, the only thing I'd say is automation is key in this space. It's too big for people. We've exceeded our ability. I mean, even if we had infinite people to hire, which we don't, there's still just there's open source is gigantic. It's millions and millions and millions of things. Like, people can't deal with that. It's gotta be the robots.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm going to call for our third and final poll question, just to get it out of the way now. Which actions do you think are most important for security and development teams to take in order to strengthen America's software supply chain? So please respond to that. Let's see, we had some more audience questions come through. Maybe we can get to a couple of those real quick. Bertus asks, how does supply chain risk management dovetail with, if at all, with zero trust enablement in the federal space and the commercial sector? So if one of our feds or industry wants to take this one first, totally up to you guys.
I can go ahead. Yeah. Both supply chain risk management and zero trust architectures are two of my most and least favorite things to talk about. Like, they're my favorite because they're new, exciting. They're my least favorite because they're widely misunderstood. People act like there's some magic bullet, and a lot of times it gets said that it's really just rebranding of the same thing that we've always been doing. And me personally, I think that's completely not true. I have drank the Kool-Aid of zero trust, and I'm really excited about it because it's getting us to a place that is really trying to like thwart any insider threats. And I think that would be the commonality with supply chain risk management is with supply chain risk management, if you're not careful, malicious activity gets inside. So really, if you're looking at both of them and you're thinking about it of like, how do I make sure that I have the most trust and confidence in what I'm doing, it's a lot easier to see the commonality between the two and the synergies between them.
Thank you, Elisa. AJ or Josh?
I would
I
add
guess I could
that.
say,
All
no, go
right,
ahead.
all right. I'll go first. I just have a quick comment. I think they're extremely related because open source is the supply chain in many instances. And in the like open source and zero trust are kind of the same problem, right? And so I don't know exactly how zero trust and our open source supply chain are necessarily going to fit together at the end of the day, but they are very, very, very similar problems. And so it's one of those things I'm always intrigued anytime I see research or commentary on it.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, AJ.
Oh, I was just going to say, we could get deep and very analytical on this, but to invoke the great Kelsey Hightower, I believe that he was the first person I heard say this, and amazingly in a presentation with no slides, and he just kind of winged it. He's like, zero trust means zero implicit trust. So to me, if you're not looking at the things that you consume to run a business or to build things to make money for a business or an organization, you live in a scary world where you are like very much implicitly trusting a lot of stuff. That being said, in many domains in our life, we kind of have to. There's this whole trust mechanism. But again, zero implicit trust means you probably should be looking at where you're getting those things from. And I don't even know if that's really a controversial thing if you put it that way, because if you tell that to anybody, they'll be like, good point. I don't want to do it. And it might take
I think we might have lost you, AJ. All right, I think we lost AJ.
energy, but I also like feeling healthier and living longer. So
Yeah, I'll jump in here now and that's exactly it. We're gonna have to get to a place where we have private and trusted repositories, because we're not going to just be able to pull any code that's out there on the internet. And I've looked into that future a little bit, and thank God for automation is all I have to say.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. And then one more audience question is from Raymond. Is SBOM good enough? How about when it's integrated with other systems, software and hardware? What are some of your thoughts on this? And anyone can jump in. Elisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not here to say what isn't good enough. That's for other beings to determine. I will say, I think there is definitely going to have to be connections and integrations into something like a CMDB. And I absolutely love that as someone who has come from like traditional software IT management, and like to really think about it holistically as your IT service management, and how is that going to get incorporated into your overall ecosystem. So that's my hot take.
Yeah, thank you. Josh?
I'm happy to add a hot take. I think SBOM is definitely good enough. It's all we got right now. I mean, so we don't really have a choice. I think the thing I would kind of offer as advice and caution is we're really early in this space still. I mean, if you think about SBOMs, they really haven't been used in the way we're using them for but 3 or 4 years max. And so there's a lot of room to grow, and there's a lot of questions. And this is where my suggestion would be figure out what your questions are, what your problems are, and you can get involved. There's many, many groups working on this, and they love having new people come and help them solve problems. I mean, CISA has a ton of stuff. The OpenSSF has stuff. You've got OWASP, the CNC. There's so many groups working on this. It's you can't turn around without finding one. So get involved. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. And AJ, do we have you back? Did you want to add anything?
Maybe I'm back. I don't know. I apologize for that. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Echoing what Josh just said, and also be funny about the original question. It will be good enough when you say it's good enough. Nothing I tell you is going to make a difference. And the only way you'll know that is by doing what Josh told you to do. And if anything, the great concern you should have is that became kind of a professional hazard for me. That's how you get involved in this work.
All right. Well, thank you. So we might have time for one more question. Let's see here. All right, let's start with Elisa again on this one. So the White House's Office of the National Cyber Director recently issued 69 high impact actions for federal agencies to help implement the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And 2 of those were the creation of software bills of material and fighting ransomware and other cybercrime. So Elisa, I just want to pose this question to you first, and then I want to hear from our other panelists weighing in. But from where you sit, what do you see as a barrier, if any, to the implementation and the use of SBOMs?
I'm going to echo what Josh said. It's also new. Like, it's, as far as the barriers that I'm seeing, probably, right, that it's hard to have folks who are experienced in something that's new, right? Like, that's putting out a job announcement for something, asking someone for having 10 years of experience for something that's only been out for like 2. Like, come on now. So I think it also gets to be a culturally thing. I like to say when I do these webinars things, like, give yourself grace for anything that you're doing for the first time. It's not going to go perfectly. Embrace agile, and like, it's okay to fail and like try again and learn from that. So that's, I'm kind of giving the, like, couchy approach here. It's going to be a hard cultural move, I think, with anything with software development at this time.
Yeah, thank you. Josh or AJ? Josh, you want to go first?
Sure, I'd love to. I mean, as a non-government employee and someone who works in the sphere of SBOM, I would love to say I would like to see the government give more teeth to some of these suggestions, because I mean, today the White House is offering guidance, but until it's written into a bill, it's always just going to be guidance, right? It's like the unfunded mandate, as people like to talk about it in the US government, where it's easy to say you should do something, but who's going to pay for it at the end of the day? And so I think we're getting close to a point we could start mandating some of these technologies, because they're getting better and they're becoming useful. And so I'm hopeful to see some regulation backing up some of this, because I think until we have good regulation, good regulation is probably a debatable term as well, but I think until we have someone saying, like, you have to do this, like, for real this time, we're not going to see the kind of progress we all would like to see in this space. So I feel like we're getting close, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you. Okay, AJ, your turn.
Yeah, this is that time where I'm going to flip what Josh did, and I'm going to contradict, or I'm going to debate him. I don't disagree with the notion, and there are a lot of people, for I think not just SBOM, a whole variety of technologies. They're like, you have to give this teeth, but as Elisa just pointed out, it's relatively new. It's weird how often I take for granted. I try to explain to a young child that HTML and some of these technologies that are, I guess, I don't know if they're new or old to the younger generation. These languages and all the ways of how web browsers are explicitly told to behave, or the implication of these things outside the specification, are over 2 decades old. As Josh pointed out, we're like not very close to that. Not that we should mandate HTML conformance, or that'd be funny, since it's actually very bad. How few people are conforming to that thing that we use even for this, which was meant for documents, not for video. It's pretty crazy. If we mandated that people use something this nascent, I'm not really sure that that's a bad idea in general, I think it's only a bad idea now because the flexibility of these formats, there is great risk to saying you should do X and X can't really change because of the pressure of maintaining regulation around it. And there are obvious examples that I'm not going to name. So those are things that we should be cognizant of. But I'd say that also is like the blessing and the curse of some of the things that were cited in the implementation plan. Um, from my perspective, I work on specifications and schemas for a different data format. Um, Minimizing complexity and making documentation for developers who make the tools is an almost never ending challenge. It is onerous, it requires a lot of detail, and it requires talking to a lot of developers, and not every developer is the same, and most of them don't have the context despite making software. Like Josh might be one of these few people, especially at the VP level, who has maybe decades of supply chain before it was called supply chain experience. I'd be doubtful that anyone in government or outside of government like starts a junior engineer in their first year. It's like, you're going to build some small piece or a full SBOM solution, and you should understand what it's for, not just the complexity of the format, but like, if you, no person would be silly at work to go, why is this format so complex and allows so many of these different options here? That's like, oh yeah, you'll get that. I just need you to wait till you have the 20 years of experience, which we're going to fast track to regulation, which means no one can really question it. That's something we have to be real fearful of. So I can see why the implementation plan in my nascent baby fed status has come out the way it has. I don't know even how you measure when the right time is, and that's from experience in another data format. And I could go on and on about that, but I'll agree to disagree this time. I could have just started with that, couldn't I, Josh? I rambled for a little bit at that point,
I think your answer is good. Like that's exactly right. It's
Thank you. I love when I'm right, which is very
Yeah,
rare. Let's be
yeah,
honest. It's nuanced. So it's not
I
really a yes or no.
it's that kind of pragmatic, rooted in reality versus like my hopes and dreams, and that's okay. That's okay. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and I kind of want to jump in here because I'm really loving this and to continue on with the flow. And I saw the question that popped up that we are looking for SBOM for safety critical systems, but makes me think, how is this going to work for implementation in complex safety critical systems? And this is something I think feeds well into it, is there are already industries out there that are doing SBOMs without regulation. And the more critical and the more mission impactful systems are, the easier it ends up being to implement the SBOM construct, because it gets actually tied to what it's being used for. And something like a complex safety critical system, the benefit there is typically there aren't a lot of changes as compared to a DevOps that you're having deployments on the hour, like to the minute. Like, oh my gosh, keeping up with SBOMs with that compared to your safety critical system, you're very deliberate and dedicated in how and when you change the system. So keeping up with the SBOMs for those is a lot more manageable.
Thank you. Go ahead, Josh.
I would add to this, in the omnibus bill last year, the FDA was required to collect SBOMs from the various vendors they're working with. And you're dead on, where like the pacemaker inside of someone, that thing better not be installing updates every day, you know? And so it's definitely much more focused and purposeful. And so that's a place where I think the SBOMs are obviously valuable, and it's working, or it feels like it's working just because of that particular environment. So yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Josh. All right, any other comments here before we move on to our takeaways, since we're about 10 minutes towards the end of our panel discussion? Okay, well then for our takeaways, I just kind of want to hear from y'all, like your final thoughts based on this conversation and what it is that you really want to leave our audience with, having learned from this discussion today, or maybe something you found to be extremely thought-provoking. So AJ, maybe we can start with you, and you have as much time as you like for this.
as much time as I like. Okay, I'm gonna need like 25 minutes, but we'll be brief. We'll keep it brief. The I'm just gonna go back to what I said before, which is that the people that are most empowered to do something are the frontline people that are pushing a technology and have to document how they're assembling it, or they're writing it and not just assembling other people's stuff, but they're the people doing it. You got to facilitate their ability to learn, act, do, rinse, repeat, allow graceful failure, like Elisa was saying. But you have to, if you're not one of these engineering people in this org, make sure that you give those people the time, not just when you tell them it's important, give them the time and tell them how important it is, not that you the person talking to them understand it, but they understand it. Find out how to support them, and if you have the time to support them and they don't have the time to get involved, as I think all of us pointed out, you don't even have to reach out to us. Google SBOM and whatever you do and see if there are people working on it, and then give them feedback about what is or isn't working. But the people that are going to do it and best trained to do it are software developers, because they can install and do in most environments what they have to do to get their job done. So your job is to really make it easy for them to subconsciously want to make supply chain decisions, even if it's not with that name and even if it's not fun. Make them see the value in it and do it for themselves. Do not have to tell them, have them believe it without having it force fed. And that's a challenge. I'm not saying that that's easy, and I can tell you all the steps after this call. Do not friend me on LinkedIn thinking I can write you a treatise on that. Much easier said than done. But that's the beauty of being in a webinar panel.
Yeah, AJ, I gotta ask you. It looks like it's pitch black out your window. Is it like the middle of the
night?
It
is. Oh yeah. It's 9 p.m. Right.
I knew you said you were traveling, so I guess that makes sense now.
Yes.
Elisa, your final thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. It's way easier said, especially here on this panel with some other great panelists, that it's so easy to just not disagree, agree with, and easier said than done. And supply chain risk management, that's the complex stuff. Like, if you don't have the basics done, it's so much harder to do the advanced things. So we really need to prioritize like getting the basics done and out of the way. There's industry groups, there's like federal like SNAP, there's people, places, and activities to get involved with, to get help. Don't go it alone. Like, this stuff is hard, but it's not exactly novel. Someone's probably doing what you're trying to do, done it, or trying to do the same thing. So go through it together.
Thank you. And Josh, we will end with you, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you. I feel like these discussions fill me with hope, because a couple of years ago, I think you could have had a similar discussion and there would have been a lot of disagreement on kind of the purpose and the why and the what. And these days, I feel like there's definitely an agreement that we have a supply chain concern, I'll call it. There's all this software being used to build everything on the planet now. It's all open source, and we have to figure out what it is. And sometimes I suspect Log4Shell was the impetus of that, because as everyone was going looking for Log4j in their infrastructure, they were like, holy crap, where's all this other stuff coming from we found? It's not just Log4j. And so I have immense hope for the future. I've been doing this for, as AJ kindly pointed out, decades at this point. I'm very old. And when I started doing a lot of this work, there was not a lot of, I guess, understanding or will to do any of this stuff. There was a lot of hostility, and granted, I mean, security people were definitely a little more abrasive then than we are now, but it has definitely been an adventure and a challenge to watch the literal decades of this whole process evolving. And this time it feels real and it feels different. And I think the things we're working on are going to stick and they're going to matter. And quite frankly, we have to do them just because like society is built on top of open source now. And it's all about like, we have to get our open source house in order. And I guess the one thing I would add, the one point I'll end on, is I have a podcast called the Open Source Security Podcast. And one of the like things I say repeatedly is open source owes you nothing. we are the consumers of open source, but open source isn't like our vendor. We can go say, oh, hey, you need to fix this bug for us. Open source is like the natural resources. The Atlantic Council released a really nice paper where they talked about thinking of open source in the context of like the water system, where if you pollute your water, you can't use it. But if you take care of it, it's a marvelous resource for us to use. And I think that's really what we're all talking about here is everything, all of this when put together is about really like resource management. And if we misuse our resources, now we have, polluted, horrible water we can't drink. But if we take care of them and we work together, now, we have marvelous resources we can all benefit from.
Yes, and I love that you brought that up too, because we had an audience member write in asking about other podcast recommendations. So we've got Josh's open source security podcast is number one, of course. I'm going to plug ATARC's. It's called the ATARC Federal IT Newscast. So you can tune into some of those episodes on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Elisa or AJ or Josh too, if you guys have other podcast recommendations around innovation, transformation. I love podcasts, so they're a fun way to learn. All right.
It's not on those topics, but like I'm going to embarrass myself by saying, and people who know me, I spend a lot of time listening to comedy podcasts, but the ones that I enjoy that are technically minded is not quite on the money. Like I actually listened to Josh's a lot, as I was joking before we started today. And Darknet Diaries. Not all the stories are supply chain oriented, but if there's one thing you can learn that goes beyond just supply chain risk management, you want to compel people in cyber. You could probably learn a lot from Jackery Arsider and learning to tell a cybersecurity problem with a very complex issue with a very wonderfully set narrative, and you'll be surprised how many people will perk up and actually do something you want to do because you frame it well. I learned a lot from that person. So go listen to him.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. All right. Well, we made it to the end of our hour. So I want to thank you all so much, our panelists and those at home and sending in your questions. It was really interactive and I appreciate it so much. And of course, our partners over at Anchor for making today possible. So our next webinar should be up on the screen here shortly. If you'd like to go register for that one, we have them every Thursday. I thought it'd be up on the screen. We'll see. Maybe, maybe not. It's definitely on our website though. And don't forget to respond if you'd like your CPE credit emailed to you or not. So there you go. Next webinar, September 12th. We hope to see you all there. Everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thank
Bye.
you.